wrestle with this guy. The man just shows up and begins wrestling. God initiates that wrestling for the purpose of making a transformation. It's like a refining process. God initiates the wrestling, but also gives Jacob the strength to wrestle for the purpose of transformation. In our wrestling, as uncomfortable as it might be, it shows us that God is doing work in us. God might be challenging you in some sort of direction in your life. God may be convicting you of sinful habits or destructive actions. God may be placing on your heart a burden for something or a direction or something God wants you to do. But for whatever reason, the point is, God wishes to bring you into a deeper place of spiritual knowledge and fulfillment. And that can only occur if you're willing to see the process through. If you're wrestling with God today, see that process through. Engage in that wrestling. Voice your hurts and your thoughts, your opinions, whatever it is within you, and humbly allow God to respond. Now again, it can be hard, and it can be exhausting. But know that God has given you the strength to persevere and to endure. Because ultimately, the third truth that this picture shows us is that the result of wrestling with God is blessing. God doesn't invite Jacob to wrestle simply to toss him around into the mud for a little bit, right, as some kind of sick divine joke. That's not what's going on. The purpose of wrestling with Jacob is to bless Jacob. The purpose of God initiating in our lives a time of wrestling is to bless us. Jacob wrestles with God and says, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And verse 29 says, "And there he blessed him." The wrestling is over. And the sun rose before Jacob, and the night of slugging it out with God was over. It's the scene of hope. It's the scene of quiet joy. It's the scene where you get the assurance that God goes with Jacob as he goes to meet his brother. Now, all the way along, Jacob has wrestled with God for blessing, trying to deceitfully amass material blessings wherever that can be, in whatever fashion he can get. He lied, he cheated, he stole, and tried to get all this stuff, because all this stuff means blessing for me. See, but now he's confronted with the full reality that the ultimate blessing of God does not occur in cattle or family, but in the promises of God spoken to him and realized in his life, and the presence of God that goes with him. So hold before Braden the reality that the blessing of God is God's presence with him and God's promises real for him. Often today in our world, we like things wrapped together in beautiful bows of goodness and pleasantry. We want things to make us happy and peaceful and satisfied and pain-free with the least amount of effort possible. If we take pain medication, it needs to work instantly. Otherwise, it doesn't work. If we go to fast food restaurants, it's got to be fast. Otherwise, there's no point. We want to carve out a struggle-free, fast, pain-free kind of life. And sometimes we translate this to God. And we assume that when we believe in God, we are going to feel great and happy forever. But this creates a truncated spirituality. This creates a falsity in our faith. Because whenever we hit a bump, or whenever we hit a question, or whenever we hit a deep woe, or whenever we feel not as spiritually with it than before, we feel that God has left the scene and we are just all by ourselves. So we need to rediscover the dynamic of faithful wrestling, of being invited into the presence of God in order to have this spiritual tete-a-tete. It is a place of reciprocal, face-to-face closeness. Charles Spurgeon said that the person who wants to get anything out of prayer must throw their whole soul into it. The same is true in our life of faith, particularly in times of wrestling. We need to throw our whole soul into it. We need to slug it out with God and bring to God every word, every feeling, every disappointment, every hurt, every question, everything that we have inside of us. We need to give it to God. Guess what? God's pretty big. God can handle it. And what we find in that process is not anger. It's not abandon. What we find is not disappointment or divine rejection. What we find is deeper presence and care, deeper than we can ever imagine. And there, we will be blessed. Now, this doesn't say that the end result of your wrestling match with God, you are going to get what you want. God rarely is in the business of simply giving us what we want. But the result will be blessing. The result will be a deeper understanding of God's promises spoken into your life, and those promises that will take root deeper than before. The result will be the blessing of fully understanding what it means for God to call God's self Emmanuel, which means God with us. We're really going to know what it means for Jesus to take on flesh and to dwell with us in the darkest and deepest points of our life. And like Jacob, the place of grace, the place of forgiveness, the place of healing is far greater felt and more deeply internalized after having gone through the point of wrestling if we avoided that whole messy situation altogether. So if you are wrestling with God today, be encouraged. Be encouraged in God's closeness with you. Be encouraged with the strength that God gives you to continue on in that process. Be encouraged in the blessing that awaits you and the deep expressions of God's love and God's favor that are in your future.